Dynamic brake axle value is assigned to each class of locomotive. A locomotive's consist must be limited to an axle value totaling 24 axles when equipped with alignment control couplers, and 20 axle values when equipped with coupler limiting blocks. The dynamic brake is not to be used if the consist is not equipped with either alignment control couplers or coupler limiting blocks. The high buff forces produced by the dynamic brake at the head end of the train will also be present when the independent brake is used. Now, for this reason, the use of the independent brake valve requires care to prevent the development of excessive brake cylinder pressure with the resultant high head end forces. The potential for high head end forces increases with the number of axles in the train consist. Now, probably no element of braking can create shock conditions more severe than the improper use of the independent brake. This train is entering a yard. A visual scanner used to verify car numbers captures the action as a heavy application of the independent brakes on the 8 locomotives in the consist is used to complete a stop. Note that the slack surge produced by high buff forces causes the leading truck of an empty covered hopper to lift completely off the track. This time the wheels came down on the track. Had this occurred in a curve or turnout, jackknifing and derailment would be likely. The retarding force from the locomotive independent brake can exceed 10,000 pounds per axle at slow speeds. As with the dynamic brake, engineers must exercise good judgment to avoid developing excessive buff forces and undesirable slack action. Now remember, when using the independent brake cylinder pressure must be increased very slowly, allowing sufficient time for slack adjustment. Excessive buff forces can also occur when starting a backup movement. The high buff coupler forces concentrated at the head end of a train when a backup movement is started can develop enough lateral force to cause locomotives and the cars they are pushing to jackknife. On tangent track, an angle may be introduced between the couplers if they move off-center alignment when absorbing the buff force. Coupler angularity between cars and or locomotives generates lateral force, which can lead to jackknifing if the total buff force is not controlled. And again, remember, the total buff force generated when starting a backup movement must be no more than that required to make the necessary movement. The number of powered axles when making a backing movement must not exceed 15 axles when the train or set of cars exceed 50 cars. Remember that all AC locomotives count as 9 axles in power when figuring this axle value. Skill and judgment are required to control the in-train forces which may develop when using the train automatic air brakes. Improper use of the automatic air brakes can generate excessive in-train forces and damaging slack action. There are 2 major factors affecting in-train forces and slack action during train air brake applications: train makeup and the serial action characteristics of a brake application. Serial action is an inherent characteristic of automatic air brake equipment. When the initial brake pipe pressure reduction is made from the locomotive, the pressure reduces in the brake pipe of the first car before it reduces at the second car, and so on through the train. Therefore, the brakes apply on the first car and develop retardation before the brakes on the rear cars have begun to apply. The head end of the train begins to slow down before the rear end, resulting in a run-in of slack. A heavy continuous reduction results in much higher brake cylinder pressure at the head end of the train than at the rear, while the air exhausts. This large pressure differential results in greater retardation at the head end than at the rear, and it may result in excessive buff forces. Now, the use of a split surface application, as described in air brake and train handling rolls, results in more even brake cylinder pressure throughout the train and reduces in-train forces. The initial reduction of 6 to 8 pounds results in preliminary quick service being transmitted throughout the train. The preliminary quick service feature does 2 things. First, it provides a local venting of brake pipe pressure at each car, which accelerates serial action through the train. Second, It ensures a minimum of 10 to 12 pounds of brake cylinder pressure on each car. Together with a 30-second delay for the brake shoes to move against the wheels, preliminary quick service provides a light, even retardation throughout the train, and it controls slack adjustment. When subsequent brake pipe pressure reductions are made in 2 to 3 pound increments, spaced at time intervals of at least 20 seconds, brake cylinder pressure remains fairly uniform throughout the train. The release of a brake application is also affected by serial action. The brakes in the rear portion of the train will release later than those in the head portion. Depending on slack conditions and the speed of the train when the release is made, a rapid run-out of slack may occur. This can result in excessive draft forces and the potential for train separation or damaged lading. The advanced display can show us the draft forces produced by slack action when the brakes are released on a train. In this case, no action, such as dynamic braking, is taken to control head-end slack while the brakes on the rear portion are still releasing. Train makeup affects both in-train forces and slack action during a brake application due to the difference in retardation between loaded and empty cars. Empty cars stop faster than loaded cars with the same brake cylinder pressure. Depending upon their location in the train, empty cars can cause either buff or draft forces to develop. Train operation through a slow order area requires special attention to minimize damaging in-train forces that can lead to buckling and disturbed track areas. Most speed restrictions are imposed for safety, so the magnitude of train forces will not create an unsafe condition. The highest levels of in-train forces occur during acceleration and deceleration, and these forces are transmitted to the track structure. When track structure has been disturbed, which sometimes occurs due to cross-tie removal or track surfacing, it has a reduced capacity to absorb in-train forces without shifting. This weakened track condition is why many speed restrictions are posted. They continue in effect until enough trains have passed to settle and compact the ballast around and between the ties. In addition to weakened track conditions, temporary speed restrictions are also in effect due to temperature extremes. Cold weather speed restrictions will be issued by the various division offices when conditions require such restrictions. Hot weather speed restrictions may also be issued in many locations due to thermal expansion of the rails. When a rail temperature increases, it tends to expand longitudinally. It becomes longer. The rail anchors attached to the rail restrain it from longitudinal movement, resulting in track structure stress. Lateral loads are introduced into the track structure, which sometimes make the track appear wavy. If the track structure has been weakened due to repairs, or if excessive longitudinal or lateral loads are induced to the track by high levels of in-train forces, the track may buckle when encountering such conditions. Several steps should be taken to avoid further track damage or possible derailment. Avoid changes in train speed within the limits of a temporary speed restriction. Operate the train through a temporary speed restriction with as low a throttle position as possible. And when possible, release train air and dynamic brakes before entering and traversing through the temporary speed restriction. Use the lowest throttle possible to start the train. Do not increase the throttle above the level that would accelerate the train to comply with speed restrictions. One way to accomplish this is to use just enough dynamic braking to hold the slack bunched and make a split service application. Remember to keep the total reduction as light as conditions will permit. In this program, we have covered the state-of-the-art in-train handling factors as they relate to track dynamics. Other aspects of track train dynamics, such as train makeup, track structure, and equipment design, are being reviewed and studied by various CSX departments. Now, there's no doubt that the better you understand track train dynamics and practice proper train handling, well, the more dependable our train operations will be. This will result in fewer derailments and slow orders, reduced freight loss and damage claims, and a reduction in equipment damage. All of these things will improve our competitive position over other railroads and other modes of transportation. It will help us improve our job opportunities and job security, And it will give us the satisfaction of being number one in our profession because we understand track train dynamics.